Hi, my name's Cos Chapman, and I usually do a radio show called Cosplay here at New River Studios. And we decided to do a little bit of an interview here with my guest for this month's cosplay, which is we've got here Peter Flanagan. And I just wondered if you'd like to introduce yourself. Who the hell are you?
Thank you, Cos. I am me, Peter Flanagan, and Cos has kindly invited me here to New River Studios for this interview today. And we're going to be talking about all sorts of things, and particularly electronic music, which has been with my life for 40 years now. I started out as a teenager, originally as a drummer, and the electronic wave was taking off in the 1970s, and so I ditched those drums, much to the happiness of my mother, and bought electronic analog synthesizers. And later in the 70s, I worked for the London Synthesizer Centre as a programmer and demonstrator, and used to work with everybody from John Fox to Vangelis to Kate Bush, and some great people.
Okay, well, I'd be very interested to know a little bit more about Kate Bush, John Fox and so on. And I see in the email you sent me, you also mentioned the Fairlight, which I think was the first commercially available sampling device. So did you actually get to use one of them? I understood they cost roughly the same as 3 houses, which would make them about £3 million in today's money, I suppose.
Unfortunately, Cos, actually I didn't get to play a Fairlight CMI. A colleague at the Synthesizer Centre left to go and work with Peter Gabriel to import them from Australia. And what was interesting, in the late 70s, early 80s, it was the birth of digital synthesis. Yes. And as you correctly say, of particularly the Series 3 that was introduced probably about 1981-82, that cost £250,000 back then. And what the ethos of the London Synthesizer Centre, and I was working, my boss was Amrik Singh Luther. He had contacted people like ARP and various other Korg and various other synthesizer companies to produce affordable synthesizers, which they did. And at that time, of the mainstream shops in London and in the UK, they didn't like this. That the fact that this guy here in London was selling cheaper, affordable synthesizers. Every Saturday, we had people from all over the country come, and some of them were in bands, some had just started out, and God knows who we had in that little shop just round the corner from the Shaw Theatre.
So affordable synthesizer. I mean, I bought myself a Wasp. I don't know if you remember the Wasp. Around about, would have been about 1978, I think it was. And that was my first introduction to playing around with the synthesizer. I later got an SH-101, another affordable, very fun synthesizer. No patch bays or anything like that. So you kind of stuck with what someone else thought was a good idea for how a synthesizer should work and be laid out and so on. I find it interesting, actually. One of the things that struck me teaching music technology over the past 10, 15 years or so is a lot of people take something like a sampler, and what do they try and do with it? They try and make it sound like something that already exists. And the things I found interesting about people like Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel, who used the Fairlight, is that they were doing things like wandering around rubbish tips, finding old pipes and hitting them, recording that, sampling it, and turning that into a main percussive part of their music. And the level of just inquiry in what can this new thing do, and what sounds can we make that have never been heard before, seemed to be much greater in those days, and we've become almost sort of lazy. I don't know. Maybe I'm being unfair, and I'm sure someone else will say, oh, you haven't been listening to so-and-so, you're only listening to these boring tracks, you ought to be listening to this. But I don't know if that fits in with your experience and view on this.
I actually agree with your train of thought on that. I think presently synthesis and electronic music is reached a hiatus. Going back to the Fairlight CMI, and yes, you mentioned Peter Gabriel, who was using the Fairlight, but notably Art of Noise, and they used to go around doing field recordings and then sample it via the Fairlight. And this is, I think, which I've mentioned to you, Cos, is particularly one of my bugbears of the state of play with electronic music today. To me, it is not inventive. Okay, there's this, I say renaissance, but in electronic music, but of looking back, particularly of, say, synth pop, of looking back to the 1980s. Now, here we are in the 21st century, we have incredible equipment, particularly of digital synthesizers and via DAWs, with digital audio workstations that are on a laptop. These are, to me, far more advanced than those early analog synthesizers. But of the present day bands, they cannot replicate what was happening in the 1980s. And to me, of what they're producing is bland. Music can't stop. Music is in permanent evolution. But I feel in this early part of the 21st century, music is at a stopping point.
So I'd like to just put forward a few contentious ideas. Firstly, I'm aware that when I start to criticise contemporary music and so on and say it's bland and so on, I can suddenly hear the voice of my father talking about the music that I loved back in the 1970s and even in the 60s. It all sounds the same. There's no lyrical content anymore. He liked Glenn Miller, he liked Count Basie and so on and so forth, and he was comparing it with that. So I'm just wondering if you've got any comments about that particular observation.
Yeah, so in that, in your reference to your father, of my comments previously, do you think I'm being reactionary or conservative?
It's not something I would say, but I was wondering if you felt that this was a possibility and whether you found that there was maybe something in that idea that things just move on and develop, and we're maybe not looking in the right place or listening in the right place to find the cutting edge, the actual bleeding edge of contemporary music, because maybe we're just not aware of where it is.
That is very true, but of the state of play, particularly of what is being broadcast on Radio 1, it has now all become very homogenised. And for example, of using the vocoder, practically every voice is being used with a vocoder, and not experimentally, it all sounds the same. And so perhaps that's where I've struck a chord with you of what your father said to you when you were a younger man. Okay, since then, we've had incredible music. But I just feel perhaps of the interesting music that is here, and that is here today, but it is not coming forward because of, say, record companies have got the monopoly. And if you think back of the punk period that broke the mould of major record labels, it came from an underground movement, but it did break that system. And I think, unfortunately, we've fallen back into that now. Okay, there is underground music, but it's not being heard on in the wider domain. And to me, that does sadden me. Okay. agreed, there's always going to be underground music and movements. But I think, and you'll probably know this, Cos, that even when we were growing up, it was hard in music of trying to get any airplay, but we did have champions like John Peel. And even people like A&R men would go around from gig to gig looking for new bands to sign. These days, no. And I feel sorry for a lot of musicians who are trying to get their music out, but they are finding it very difficult.
I think it's certainly true that it's very difficult now. I suppose that one of the problems is there's just so much, there's a data glut. So I can go on YouTube or Spotify and I've got everything I can imagine, and none of it really interests me, and I hardly use either of them. Every so often someone introduces me to something, I go, well, I didn't know that was happening, and that's good. But it's very difficult for anything to rise above the general sort of level of background noise. Record companies now, are they a thing of the past? We had several majors now, and I think we're down to almost like one and a bunch of indies nowadays. So I do wonder how relevant and important radio or record companies are to a contemporary world. Maybe they're the thing that's on the way out. That's them that's waning. It's them that's actually ebbing away, and we're maybe waiting for that vacuum to be filled by some other conduit, some other means. Maybe things are just fragmenting. We're going to end up with lots and lots of tiny little niches spread out in terms of geographical location, but connected via things like Facebook or whatever the current thing happens to be. Would have been MySpace 10 years ago, I suppose. So maybe we're just living in a time of flux and things are going to settle down and sort out. What I would say, and this is my next controversial statement, MIDI ruined electronic music. What do you think?
I actually would disagree with you on that. I think actually MIDI is been a revolution. If you think of going back into the analog days of synthesizers, you could go up. Okay, sometimes on an old synthesizer, say like particularly a Moog, you could turn it on, not let it warm up, but you could literally blow on it and it would put it out of tune. And that was the thing with older analog synthesizers. You had to allow them to warm up so they would stabilize. And of digital synthesizers, you do not have any problem like that, and I'm quite happy with what is going on in the digital world. Okay, you cannot forget analog synthesizers. And just going back to what you said earlier, Cos, of where we are in this state of flux, and I agree with you. If you, for example, of HMV and major record stores, they have closed down. And I was talking to the retired head of the digital music department at Solent University, Bernhard Living. He said to me quite a few years ago, there is a whole generation who do not go out and buy music.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's free downloads.
Yeah.
And this is where, and we are living in a new musical revolution. Where it pans out to, that's a good question.
Yes, if we knew, we'd probably be making a lot of money very soon.
Oh, yes. Where's the oracle?
Yeah, yes. If only we knew.
Yes.
So that was the first two contentious things, and I'd like to just throw another thing that's a thought that's crossed my mind is, when was the last great masterwork of Western art music? I can think of, in the electroacoustic genre, something like Hymnen by Stockhausen, Berriot's works, and maybe even something like John T. Harrison's Clang, which was using very early sort of sampling and so on, Mortuus Plango, those sort of things. But they're all pretty much early 80s, as far, and certainly the Stockhausen's late 50s.
That's right.
Has that also become sort of stuck? I don't think there's been anything that's made me go, wow, that's an amazing, remarkable piece of music in ages, really.
I think you're correct, actually, there. I think certainly of Stockhausen, as you said, of the late 50s, 60 years ago, that presently there hasn't been anything. Okay, all right. Of Anna Maria Avram, who was a dear friend of mine, a Romanian composer, and considered to be one of Romania's finest composers. She unfortunately died last year. I saw her and her husband Yanku perform at Cafe Oto, and some people would consider their music to be discordant. My God, what is that noise? But they were actually trying to work on sound, and one would have to appreciate what they were trying to do. And I think, of going back to your question, Cos, I think there is no major movement or anybody who's that I can actually say.
Because to me, one of the things in popular music is I haven't heard anything I felt was really new since maybe drum and bass 25 years ago, which is sort of jungle. And most of the other things that have come out since then have been refinements or subgenres of already existing movements. Drum and bass did actually sound quite new to me, the sort of intelligent dance music, I think they call it as well. And there's a whole slew of things in the late 80s and early 90s which looked really exciting. And that seems to have just sort of fizzled out. I've heard some bits and pieces played to me by students, so I'm lucky enough to have worked in Hackney and to have a lot of stuff played to me. And you hear things occasionally, think, that's interesting, that's nice, but nothing's making me go, my God, that is new. I never expected that. I couldn't have predicted that. I'm astonished by this amazing new thing that's come about. Maybe that's just the state of things. So across popular music, across the Western art movement, jazz, I've heard nice things I like, but I haven't heard anything that's, wow, that's really taking it off somewhere new and different. Maybe music's just finished. It's a genre, art form that's had its day, rather in the way that cave painting and icons have had their day.
I think that there's a valid point in that, but I think music still has, in its history and its evolution, there is time for new things to be discovered. And about my music, of the music I was going to ask you of Renovatio 41, a friend of mine, Joe Mangan, who's studying his music doctorate at Southampton University, said to me quite recently, he said, Peter, there is nobody doing any music like you.
That's always good to hear.
And Giovanna asked me earlier about my music and of trying to pigeonhole music, and I'm not a great fan of music being pigeonholed. Music is music, but one person said a little while ago that my music is he thought is neoclassical electronic music. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll go with that, because I'm perhaps call me old-fashioned, but I'm a believer of something called melody and harmony. I'm not classically trained, I'm self-taught, but music comes within. If you think of a great composer who Debussy came across was Erik Satie, and what Debussy loved about Satie's work was the harmony, and that's why eventually Satie went to the Music Conservatoire in Paris. And of my music, I think you probably would know this, cause it comes sometimes literally out of the ether. And one can say of your influences throughout your life that they might have a part to play, which they often do. But sometimes music comes from absolutely nowhere and you end up scratching your head thinking, well, where did that come from?
You're a conduit for something coming from almost from a higher plane, it seems. I just wanted to ask you, because you talk about your world premiere, Elusive Angels, with Jane Chapman at the Royal College of Music. Would you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, this happened 5 years ago, Cos, at the Reimer Hall at York University. Jane Chapman is harpsichord professor at the Royal College of Music, and for somebody who's been trained classically and primarily Baroque music, Jane is open to more contemporary music and of introducing synthesis with the harpsichord. Now, that performance at the Reimer Hall, I'd recorded the harpsichord and played around with it and came up with the piece that what Jane did, instead of actually playing the keyboard, she stroked the strings, as in glissando.
Yes. And
used timpani sticks. And at the Reimer, they have a 5.1 Gen X surround system, and the sound was unbelievable. Vijay Gasuida had come over specially from Tokyo to perform with us, and so the sound and the visual element was brilliant, and that became the world premiere.
Wow, sounds fabulous. Is it possible to see that at all as a good old YouTube Vimeo?
It is on YouTube and Vimeo, yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Excellent. I'll have to look that up. So that was, let's get the name right, Elusive Angels, and it was at York, the York Spring Festival. Is that the University of York?
That's, yes, as I said, that's at Heslington, University of York, Reimer Hall.
Trevor Wishart, did he work there?
I can't remember that.
Yes, I've got I remember reading this very, very detailed book about trying to define all the different types of sound that's possible using electronic music.
Talking of York, I think Gabriel Prokofiev actually went to York, and he lives locally in Hackney.
Non-classical.
Yes, absolutely. And then sort of perhaps what I like to say of what's going to happen, my projects in the future.
Yes, I was going to ask you about what you had in the pipeline.
Next year, I'm going to be collaborating with Amanda Kramer from the Psychedelic Furs on a very interesting music and dance project. And I'm going to be very tight-lipped on this.
Oh.
You have to wait and see.
Okay. I assume we'll hear about it when the time is right.
Yes. And with Amanda sort of being on tour with the Psychedelic Furs, we're leaving it till next year, then she'll have more time for us to work out what we're going to do. But what I love is that symbiosis of music and dance.
Yes, absolutely.
And this will be stage dance, contemporary. I will open one little thing about this, is in Irish Gaelic tradition, you have the storyteller, the shonky. Now the shonky normally wears a cloak made of swan's feathers, which you have to wait and see what happens.
Okay. Oh, sounds fascinating. I have to say, working with dance is actually, I found one of the most rewarding things and the best way of actually getting music, people to listen to music. Because I always think no one wants to sit and watch me hunched over a bunch of bits of electronics. They'd far rather see someone who actually knows how to move and present themselves, which kind of starts me off on the idea of using someone else manipulating them shamelessly in order to have something for other people to look at as much as anything else. Have you worked with dancers before?
I haven't actually, so this will be a first, but I've always been taken by that, as I said, that amalgam of dance and music. It has a symmetry to
Yes,
it, and I absolutely love that. Yeah.
They're very primal things, aren't they? Movement. They're both time-based.
Yes.
Unlike, say, painting or something like that. So you've got the time base. They both are movements in time. That's one's movement of air, one's movement of a body. And I find that is sort of almost synesthetic, the way it's sort of.
And I think of our art form, of all the art forms, music, which you said, would it be redundant? I think music of all the art forms touches us, creatures of emotion. Okay, a good read can stimulate you, it can make you laugh, it can make you cry, it can make you think. And a piece of artwork, a painting or a sketch can do the same. But music has that experience of where it makes you happy, sad, and even make your hair stand on end. A book or a piece of artwork doesn't do that.
It certainly seems a very, very fundamental activity that I can't remember where I read it. Maybe I just made it up. But humans are the singing ape. And I think bonobos maybe sing as well. But it's something that we did before we spoke. Singing and music predates speech. I don't know.
Well, just talking about the singing ape, I was just saying to Ivana a bit earlier of Linnaeus, who came up with the Latin term of Homo sapiens.
Yes.
Wise man?
It's maybe a little optimistic to say wise man. So you've got that coming up at the moment. What have you got coming up in the near future? So you've got the dance projects. You've got any performances planned?
I haven't got any performances planned, but I'm still working on compositions, which I have numerous compositions, and as you would know, sometimes they become active and then you drop them. But there's a lot of work that I'm going to be working on, and of next year with Amanda Kramer, I shall be upgrading a lot of my hardware equipment because there's some very interesting pieces of kit out there that I want to put my hands on.
So how do you work? I mean, do you get a pen and pencil and some staves and start putting dots on paper, or do you work on a computer, and are you thinking of it from the point of view of the notation, or do you experiment with sounds and try and morph? What's the actual sort of workflow?
I know, as I said to you earlier, I'm not classically trained, and so I actually don't read music. It would take me forever and a day to read a piece of music, and it comes to me, and my tool of composition is a DAW Ableton, where I produce all my music. And yes, sometimes I do have an idea in my head, but no, it normally comes to me. And of going back to the whole ethos of synthesis, of where you have a sound, you have a parameter, what do? You don't keep that parameter stuck on one or what have you. You turn it, and you then create a new sound. For example, it was a sample, but I thought, no, I want to change it. It was of an orchestral drum. I synthesized it, and what it came out was a deep sounding cathedral bell. And that's through synthesis. Okay. And this is what I will go on to say. I think of electronic music, I think there's not a lot of people who are experimenting with what their palette, to use that term. It's almost like painting music by numbers. Sample, okay, we'll have that, and that will not add anything that is personalised to that sound or sample. And to me, then, that is where music is being manufactured, not created.
It's eating itself. I mean, there's a band in the late 80s called Pop Will Eat Itself, and it kind of has. I mean, it's sort of like processing what was around before and bringing it up again. I find what you're saying about the working process, empiricism is the key. Experiment. Have you ever thought of taking that? I mean, what I do is play live, and I make it up. I improvise with electronics because that's dangerous and it can go horribly wrong, and frequently does. So have you experimented with that much?
Well, certainly, I think probably going back to the analog days, I did. But there again, of the VST plugins that I have, I spend time. And you know, I've got to say this, Cos, of where, and it's just a lot of people from other parts within the music industry say about people who are creating electronic music, oh, it's just pressing a button. Pete Waterman came up, I think, had this said to him many years ago, and he's turned around and said, well, you do it then. And I had somebody say, who was a double bass player, said this to me recently. I didn't comment, but yes.
Maybe best not to.
Best not to.
And I noticed you mentioned playing, who are we going on? Tim Blake, yes.
Well, that is going back many years
I remember
ago.
Gong and Hearing
Well,
Now.
Tim Blake was the synthesizer player in Gong, the Anglo-French band, and after there was the split, which unfortunately I think Mr. Branson caused a situation where there was actually a demonstration at Virgin Records at Portobello Road that I attended, and it was where he was saying, I own Gong.
What?
Yes. And there was a whole lot of us who absolutely went and squatted Virgin Record offices, you know.
Really?
But Tim, I consider to be a mentor and my professor extraordinaire. When I was helping him with his New Jerusalem album at Ridge Farm in Surrey, he showed me so much. It was incredible. He's an absolute maestro of electronic music.
Yeah, it would have been wonderful to have worked with him. It must have been great fun. But I want to ask you now, you've given me a list of people that you worked or you met. Vangelis, Kate Bush, Peter Gabriel, Gary Newman, John Fox, Tim Blake, we've already had. But Kate Bush is such a reclusive and so on. What was she like?
Kate Bush, which I said to Giovanna, when I used to meet her at Air Studios, I used to take a synthesizer that she and the band had requested, and also there was a studio up in Willesden Green that I used to go to. Now, Kate Bush was the same age as me. She was a charming, lovely young woman. I remember her when I was a young man. She was just so nice, and even to the point of making a cup of tea.
Oh, brilliant!
And so in that capacity, when I was working for the London Synthesizer Centre, I would go and set up the synthesizer, and they would ask me, "Can you get this sound or that sound?"
Okay.
And program the synthesizer.
That was the program.
And then leave it to them to do the recording.
Cool. And Peter Gabriel as well.
Peter Gabriel, I met a couple of times, primarily at the Synthesizer Centre, and this is where a colleague had left the company to go and work with Peter to import the Fairlight from Australia.
Right.
There was a couple of times I used to take instruments out to studios like the Townhouse in London, because I think he was signed to Virgin, so I used to go there.
And Vangelis seems we've got.
Oh, Vangelis. Now, he was such a gent. When he was in London, he had a studio near Paddington Station in some old building that didn't have a lift, and he hired 2 Yamaha CS80s. Now, they were a very heavy piece of equipment. My colleague and I had to lift these up these staircase to him, to the studio. He was appreciative. He said, "Okay, chaps, I'm just a little bit busy at the moment. Set them up." So he went and did his bit of recording. He came back and cooked us breakfast.
So you had tea made by Kate Bush and breakfast
Made by Vangelis.
Brilliant. Well, there's 2 more on the list, and I have to say the 2 people I particularly like as well. I mean, you've named a load of people. I'll go anyway. That's Gary Newman and John Fox.
Gary Newman came into the synthesizer centre one day and said, "Can I hire 40 Polly Moogs? This is for a photo shoot."
What? Did you have 40 Polly Moogs?
I think there wasn't 40 Polly Moogs in the country. So we hired 2, and they had to do a multiple shoot, you know?
Yeah, you do it with
That was my
Photoshop
experience
nowadays,
of Gary
wouldn't you?
Newman.
Gary Newman and John Fox.
Now, John Fox, what a wonderful gentleman.
That's good to know.
I can't remember the synthesizer, up to a small recording studio near Holloway Road, and we spent hours and hours talking about this, that and the other, and that was my experience of John Fox.
Really?
Yeah.
Just chatting?
Just chatting.
Brilliant. Oh, that's really nice to know. He's always struck me as being a nice person. I do like his post Ultravox as well as the stuff.
Absolutely,
I mean,
absolutely.
not quite the same band after he left, I
Yes.
feel. But yes, it's good to know he was as I imagine, and he's still definitely going and doing stuff and producing albums. I believe I've seen a few around recently. And the other thing that you mentioned here, which I sort of like jumped out at me, was Edmund Cooper, the science fiction writer.
Edmund I knew when I lived in Sussex, and I got to know Edmund via his children, who were similar ages to me, and they invited me to their house, which was near Arundel, and Edmund sowed a seed in me on 2 fronts, of science fiction, which I then went on to study at North East London Poly, or University of East London as it is known now, and because the North East London Poly used to have the Foundation Library, which was set up by J.G. Ballard and Arthur C. Clarke, and that was at the old Barking faculty, which was originally Barking Tech College. Unfortunately, that library is now transferred to Liverpool University. It probably is the world's premier science fiction library.
Wow.
And I studied under, my tutor was Colin Greenland, the author, and we used to talk about punk music, but not science fiction.
Of course.
And the other thing about Edmund, when I took my those old analog synthesizers to play at the house, he said to me afterwards, "Peter, this is the music of the future." And he sowed a seed, and I stayed with both science fiction and with electronic music.
Excellent. So that sort of like starts you off on the whole journey.
It started me off on the whole journey.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's a good point to just sort of conclude now.
Yeah.
I think we've covered quite a bit of ground. I'm sorry to have been contentious in some of the things that I said, but I did want to press you.
But that is what an interview is about, and this is about of something that is our oeuvre, and that one has to nitpick it at times and unravel it and see what it really is up to. Yeah, and I've got to say thank you very much for today.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in.
Good to see you, sir. And you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yavanna.